I guess as an anecdote, one of the oddest things I've ever seen in my birding was in Texas about 25 years ago, um, watching a field where some vultures were um, resting, and crested caracara, which is another, it's in the falcon family, but a scavenger mostly. And a few caracaras were hanging out with the vultures. And one of the caracaras walked over to a vulture and started preening the feathers on the back of the vulture's neck. And the vulture bent over and fluffed its feathers. And you know, that kind of behavior, that one bird preening another, is known in quite a few species. It's not that unusual, but it's always a raven preening a raven, or the same species. But seeing birds, completely unrelated birds, a falcon and a vulture, engaged in that was very odd. And I saw it a couple of times that day, and have never heard of any other explanation or any other experience like that. So that's one of my oddest bird observations.
All right, so that was about anecdotes about interbird interaction. And then here's another question about blue jays, actually, from Sarah Kebler. Do blue jays have blue pigment? And if not, what color pigment do they have?
They do not. No, there is no blue pigment in birds. All the blue color that you see is created by the structure of the surface of the feather. And so the pigment that's in the feathers is black, gray. But it's the structure, the way the structure of the surface of the feather interacts with the light waves, reflects blue color and absorbs all of the other wavelengths. So it's I have an explanation of that in the book with the hummingbird, in the hummingbird pages, and then a diagram of how the blue feathers work on a bluebird. So you have to consider that light comes in waves, and different colors have different wavelengths. So there's a dimension to it. And if the dimensions of the structure in the feather match the dimensions of the light wave, certain waves will be reflected and all the others will be absorbed. So it's an incredible adaptation, but it has evolved in butterflies, other insects, fish, birds have all evolved these structural colors where the surface of their skin or feathers or scales interacts with the light waves and reflects certain colors.
All right. So we have a question from Edith. You discussed the birds that live in your yard at the program's beginning. Where do you live?
I live in Western Massachusetts, Central Massachusetts, right along the Connecticut River. So it's spring is coming slowly. We're expecting more snow tonight, unfortunately, but it'll melt quickly. I think it's going to be above freezing tomorrow. So, but the birds, a lot of birds have come back already. They're already starting to nest, and others will be coming in the next 2 weeks.
All right. From Robert, any opinion on the impact of the proposed rollback of Migratory Bird Treaty Act on bird populations?
Well, it's awful. That's my opinion. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act is one of the most important and effective wildlife protection laws ever, and the rollback is just kind of gutting that law, allowing companies to do things that harm birds as long as their intent is not to harm birds. But that's, I don't think anyone really ever intends to harm birds, but we need laws that protect, that give the birds some protection, some voice. And yeah, I think it's a really bad development to be rolling back that law.
We have a question from Sophie. Do you have any interesting stories about tool use among crows or other corvids?
I don't personally, but I know there's a tremendous amount. I mean, crows are fascinating to watch, and there's been a lot of research on them. I haven't seen tool use myself in crows, but I see birds like crows and gulls. I see birds playing, essentially. I mean, if you want to say something instead of a tool, a toy, I see birds using things as toys, a stick or a tennis ball or a bit of brightly colored plastic. One bird will grab it and fly around, just sort of taunting the other birds, trying to engage them in a game of chase or tag, and other birds chase and try to steal this coveted item from them. And so I see that. I've seen that a number of times. Birds really seeming to play, and to play with items that they're using as toys, as sort of prizes that they fight over.
I have a question.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Chip asks, what are your 2 or 3 favorite bird books, and which had the biggest influence on you?
Well, that's a good question. You know, I would go back to when I was a kid, when I was just starting. One of the books that I loved was a big coffee table book called Birds of the World, with paintings by Arthur Singer. He's the same artist who did the paintings in the Golden Guide to Birds of North America, which was the field guide that I used most when I was a kid. So that book, the big coffee table book with really fun, big paintings of all the representatives of birds from all over the world. And another one is another big coffee table book called Shorebirds of North America, with paintings by Bob Clem. And they're just gorgeous, gorgeous paintings, full landscapes with birds in them. But he just had an incredible ability to paint shorebirds and the habitats, and those paintings had a huge influence on me. And I guess another book that really stands out is a Field Guide to Birds of Europe. That's more recent, by an artist named Lars Johnson from Sweden. And I discovered his work in some other books in the early 1980s, and that those books had a big influence on my painting and my field guides. And so yeah, those are probably the 3 most influential books in my life.
We got a big thumbs up there from Chip. All right, we have a question from Jamie. Where is your favorite place to go birding?
You know, I guess I have enjoyed birding everywhere that I've ever been. And there's always unique things to see in each place. I always discover interesting and new things everywhere I go. But for all around birding excitement, my favorite place is Cape May at the southern tip of New Jersey. And that I spent a lot of time there. Was my home base for about 20 years. And I lived there full time for 8 years in the 90s. It's just really, really exciting. It's like a funnel. The the point of a funnel at the southern tip of New Jersey, and all the birds migrating south through New Jersey pass through there. So you can stand in one place anytime from the middle of August to the middle of November and see 100 species in a day without moving. And the birds just stream by. It's incredible.
That sounds beautiful. So we have a question here from Jared. Do you have any advice for someone interested in learning to draw or paint birds?
Yes, well, practice, practice, practice. And watching birds, just watching and thinking about how they're moving, how all the parts fit together. Another a really good resource is photographs. Birds are hard to pin down in the wild. They're hard to get a really good look at and understand what's happening in real time. But if you can look at a photograph and figure out some of the details of the different feather groups and the way the parts fit together, you'll be better able to sort those things out in real life. But there's no substitute for watching a live bird and really studying that and trying to do some drawings in real time. I think that's really a key to capturing the real sort of spirit, the essence of the bird, sort of is just real observation in the field.
So we have Paula Super. If you're listening, I see here that you have a Bluebird story. Would you be interested in sharing that story with us? You're live now if you are available. Oh.
I can unmute myself.
We can hear you now.
Okay. I got bluebirds this year in a bluebird box that I put up, and they've started communicating with me, which is great fun and with staying inside, because I bought mealworms. I throw them out on my deck. The birdhouse is on a support of the deck. And the bluebird male, the female too, but the bluebird male will sit up on one of the top of the other feeders I have, and he comes down and gets the mealworms right away. So this was going on for a week or so, and as soon as I'm up in the morning, he taps at my window. At noon, he taps at my window, and at 5 o'clock, he taps at my window, and I say, okay, okay. And I open the slider carefully, and I throw out the mealworms, and he and his wife or whoever. So one day I was inside, and I'd thrown out the food, and 10 minutes later, he tapped again, and I said to myself, look, I'm not going to feed you all day. I mean, you know, it's only been 10 minutes. But he was very insistent, so I went and looked out the slider door, and there was a robin eating his mealworms.
Oh.
So, so if he ever taps and it's not one of those 3 times of the day, I know it's because he's bugged because somebody's eating his mealworms. It's really fun.
Well, Paula, I think we just need to rename you Snow White now, if you have animal friends that are coming to join you.
Well, I lived with a bird for 17 years, so I know they are very bright.
Well, as soon as they start sweeping your floors, you let us know and we'll come by. All right, so let's see. We have some more questions here. What kind of bird would you be if you could be a bird?
Oh. There's a bird called a brown boobie that I think has a pretty good life. Lives in the tropical oceans, eats fish, and they're really good, really strong flyers, and they catch their food by flying along and then diving, just folding up and plunging headfirst into the water, and then when they're not flying around fishing, they hang around on little sort of coral sand islands in the tropical ocean. So I think that sounds like a pretty good life.
That does sound like a very good life. Let's see. So the crow question we had earlier, she is here. Hello, Claudia. She says they do come back. Hi, Claudia. They do come back, and she's she says that they douse them in the water, which is fascinating. It reminds me a bit of how raccoons scrub their food in the water before they eat it
Yeah.
as well, actually.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't heard of crows doing that, sort of washing their food, but it sounds like that's what they're doing, just rinsing it off or getting it wet.
Right. So we have a question from Paul. What are the different ways that birds navigate in migration?
Oh, no, there's a lot of mystery still to that. Birds can navigate by the stars. They have an instinctive star map that they can follow. They sense the magnetic field of the Earth, and they sense not just the direction but the slope. So the magnetic field comes out of the north magnetic pole, going vertically straight up, and then it circles around the Earth and goes in. I think that's the way it goes, in vertically at the south magnetic pole. So at each point on the Earth, it has a slope. It's either going straight up or at some angle or more or less horizontal at the equator. And the birds can sense that slope also, as well as the direction. So they have some idea of latitude. They use smell somehow in their navigation. At least some species do. Nobody's quite sure how, but smell is important in some ways. What else? And once birds like pigeons, homing pigeons, once they have experience with a route, they follow landmarks. They follow rivers, roads, they pass buildings. So once they have experience with traveling on a route, they'll travel exactly the same route each time, following landmarks on the ground. But the exactly how a little songbird leaves from South America and flies to Canada and spends each winter and each summer on the same little patch of woods, the same couple of acres. Nobody really knows yet exactly all of the details of how a bird figures out where it is and what direction it needs to go at what time. They're getting closer, but there's still a lot of mysteries about that. They have a lot of different systems for navigation, a lot of different abilities, but how they put it all together to say, I'm here, I need to go there by this date, is still a mystery.
I have a question here actually for me, I suppose, from Ed. How in the future can we get an autographed copy of this book, given that we will not be able to go to this great event physically? Why, Ed, funny you should ask that, because Gibson's Bookstore has signed book plates. We ship online, and I am going to drop a link into the chat box here so that anybody who is interested in a copy of this book, you can purchase from Gibson's Bookstore. We are offering 99-cent shipping on media mail shipping to the continental US right now, and we are including those signed book plates with any purchases from our store. So I'm going to put that in our link right now. Our online store is open 24/7, I would like to say. But let's get back to you, David. Darlene says, I've noticed some birds seem to arrive at my feeder in groups, yet they are all different birds. One group seems to have brown-headed cowbirds, red-winged blackbirds, and starlings. Is this common? Do they all travel together?
Yeah, some birds form mixed species groups. And that group that you've mentioned is one common grouping. The blackbirds and starlings kind of join. So blackbirds and cowbirds are related, starlings in a different family, but they often join blackbirds. They have sort of similar habitat preferences and similar food preferences. So there are advantages to being in flocks. um, and they'll just join a flock that has more or less the same intentions. So that's a pretty typical grouping, those blackbirds and starlings. In the woods, there's been a lot of research on some more diverse mixed species groups, and especially in the tropics, you'll find mixed species flocks with many species all traveling together, just sort of roaming around the forest. And they all get some advantage from it. There's some birds are kind of poking under leaves and looking for insect larvae, caterpillars, things like that. There's other birds that tag along and catch all the little flying insects that are scared out when the probing birds look for caterpillars. And some birds are very alert to predators, and the other birds rely on them to sound the alarm. So it's all like a big a functioning community where they're all contributing and benefiting in some way.
I think we have time for a few more questions here. Let's take one from James. We've seen the birds at Fundy Bay fly very close together. How do they do that without colliding into each other?
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of that question.
They've seen the birds at Fundy Bay fly very close together.
Oh, yeah.
How do they fly that without colliding into each other?
Yeah, their reactions are very quick. Their vision is very quick. As I said, they can, you know, to us it looks like they're moving extremely fast, but to them, with their faster processing and their vision, it's less of a blur. And I have a little one section in the book. One of the topics I cover is how a flock of birds like that moves seemingly in unison. There's research on that has found that all the birds, they're just reacting to their neighbors in the flock. So if one bird turns and its neighbors turn and then their neighbors turn, it happens so quickly that you know, it's sort of like the wave going around a stadium, a sports stadium, where each person just reacts in turn to you know, stand up and wave your arms when your neighbor does. And in the bird flock, a flock the size of a football field can completely change direction in under 3 seconds. They're so quick at reacting to their neighbors.
That's really fast. All right, so we have a question here from Herb Smith. Do birds know when it's time to migrate based on info from its parents or weather or seasons? Even if it's a colder than normal spring, is this knowledge to come still there? Are they migrating based on instinct or taught knowledge?
Yeah, most birds migrate on instinct. It's really incredible. And there's some of the sandpipers, they nest in the Arctic and winter in South America. And the adults leave the breeding grounds weeks before the young do. So the adults in some cases leave before the young are really able to fly very well. So the adult birds are long gone, headed to South America, while their offspring are still on the tundra in northern Canada and Alaska. And a few weeks later, the young birds start flying south completely by instinct. They know somehow where to go and when, and make it to their wintering grounds. So I think in most birds, it's instinct. There's a few species where family groups stay together through migration and through the winter. bringing the young with them. That's just a few species that do that.
Oops, I was muted somehow. All right, I'm back.
No.
No worries. How about one more question here? Oh, two more questions. That's a good one, Janine. What is the most surprising discovery you have made about bird behavior?
Oh. That's a tough question, because I haven't studied bird behavior in the field. I would say that, I mean, the story that I mentioned earlier about the caracara preening the vulture, that's the most surprising observation I think that I've ever had. And but discovery, I'm not sure. I guess that,
Well,
I think
we can circle back to that, but how about we ask
Okay.
Janine's, why don't we ever really see baby birds? We'll have this be perhaps our last question.
All right. Oh, so yeah. Well, one reason we don't see baby birds very much is that they're only babies for a few days. Once they leave the nest, most birds, like songbirds, like cardinals, chickadees, they rely on the adults for a week or two for food, and they still look like babies for a few days. Then they grow their full set of feathers, and they're not easy to distinguish from the adults once they've finished growing their wings and tail. So you wouldn't really recognize them as babies unless you really knew what you were looking for. And during those few days when they've left the nest and before their feathers are fully grown, they're staying pretty quiet, staying hidden in the shrubbery, hidden in the foliage. They're calling to their parents, asking for food, so that's one way to find them, but they don't move around a lot, and they don't come out into the open. So they're staying undercover for those few days, and by the time they come out of that, and they're acting like they look like and they're acting like full-grown birds. So I think that's the biggest reason, is just that it's a very brief time that they actually look like babies.
That I didn't know that. That seems like a very fast growing pains, so to speak.
Yes.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming out tonight. And David, thank you for joining us. Have a great night, everybody.